Hi guys, what we're going to be building today is an AI agent that performs research on Google on your behalf, that finds the topics that you're interested in and crafts them into an email based on a template that you've designed. It will then send you the same email based on the most recent data every day so you can stay up to date. First, we're going to see a little bit about the process that I take when designing AI agents on Draw.io. We're then going to take a look at the code in a Jupyter notebook and how that works from start to finish. And finally, we're going to look at how you can deploy your own research assistant on Render. And you don't need to understand how the code works to do that. So if you want to jump straight to the deployment, you can do. See you there. So I want to take you through my process for planning out agentic applications and GenAI apps in general. I tend to use Draw.io as a whiteboard to get my thoughts down, to identify any technologies I'll need to use, any issues I might encounter along the way. So I'll take you through the plan that I did for this video and the flow that we're going to follow that you'll see in the Jupyter notebook. Right, let's start over here. What I want is an email summary coming out the end down here, an email summary sent to my inbox. So I started with this output that we want, and I then identified what I need to use for that. You can choose to send emails using your own Gmail account, but I would rather use a transactional service. And in this case, I'm using Brevo. And the reason is because they've got a free tier. I'm not doing mass mailing, so yeah, I can handle 300 emails a month. So I can use a free API key with Brevo to do exactly what I need to do. So I started there. Then I go over to the input and kind of ignore this middle logic here until the end. What I want to be able to do is take Google search results. So take search on Google every single day and identify the most relevant results for what I'm interested in. And what I identified then I need to use is an API to search through Google. In this case, I'm using Serper. They again have a free tier that I'm using, which is very convenient. What I then need to do, once we've got the search results back, I'm going to need to be able to scrape the HTML. And now I could use something like Beautiful Soup in Python to do that. But the issue with that is that if it's a JavaScript page, if there's any JavaScript code and it's server-side rendering or even client-side rendering of that JavaScript, I wouldn't be able to load it without using a library like Selenium. And because I want to get this deployed, that just adds an extra layer of complexity that I'm not prepared to use. And so for that reason, I'm using a scraping API. And I was actually quite impressed when I found this API, Scraping Fish. I'd recommend you check it out because it's a pay per use API. So I put down £2, $3 worth of credit on Scraping Fish. And that's been more than enough for this project and will last me a good number of months or with this email summarization tool. So I identified the tools that I need to use. The next step was then figuring out what searches am I going to do, because I want to be able to use Google search, and I don't actually think it's the best approach to use an agent at this point to identify what it needs to search off the back of. So there's two approaches to this. There's give an agent as much freedom as possible to be able to choose what it searches, identify follow-up links, identify follow-up queries, or constrain its use to work more closely to how I want it to work. And I've gone for the latter, so I've kind of constrained it a little bit more so that it's more focused. And that's because I know what I want in this email. I'm not interested in letting it be flexible. And if I want something different or I see something different after the results have come back, then I can go in and manually change the keyword terms. So I then identified, right, here, these are the key terms that I want to use. Information about Agentic AI, OpenAI, Meta, Perplexity, Gemini, and then a lot of the social media sites where people are talking about it, because that's going to be the most up to date. And actually, before even designing this agent, I then decided what it is I want to see in this email summary, what it is that I actually want and what it is I don't want. And I think this is really important to do, especially for GenAI apps, because this can have a big impact on the design of the agent. And also, I think until you start actually writing down what it is you want, it's difficult to know what it is you actually want and what it is you don't want. We can then use these as the basis for our prompts as well, further down the line. So these will form guidelines for how we formulate the prompt and make sure that it's a balanced setup. So that's why it's important to get these things down before you even start the project, I think. So what I particularly want to see is I want to see updates from the main AI players, OpenAI. I also want to see how people are using agents in industries. A lot of people post on LinkedIn about how they're using AI agents. And I'm interested in news, maybe a little bit of gossip. And I know that what I don't want to see as well is I'm not really interested in seeing startup blogs, like someone trying to push content on me, or Google ads. Yeah, so that's not what I want to see. So now that we know what we want, I can then get into the design of the actual agent and what we're going to use. The idea being that we can search Google with our Serper APIs and scrape the content back with scraping fish. We're going to then search for each of these terms, Agentic AI, OpenAI, on Google, and we're going to get back the first 30 results in the last 24 hours. So the most recent 30 results for each of those terms. And just like you would when you're going on Google, we're going to scan through each of those like headline summaries and use a language model, a separate language model, to just check, is it even relevant? Is it worth exploring? So that way we don't waste any AI credits, and we also don't end up with too much information for the language model to digest further down the line. So this is like an initial relevance check. We're then going to open up the page with our scraping fish tool to get the actual contents. And then we're going to feed it back into another language model to summarize it. We're going to summarize the page. And at this point, I think when I was doing the planning, I was intended to have a template being involved here, but actually I didn't implement that. So after we've created these page summaries, we will then have about maybe 10, 15 different page summaries for each of the links that we've found. It probably isn't going to be 30 results, but it might be 4 or 5 for each of these terms. So we'll have 30 summaries that then need to be all pulled together into a single email that I can receive and scan through early in the morning when I don't have much time, but I want a quick headline news about what's going on in the agent world at the moment. And this is the point when we then need to pull in a template. What do I want that email to look like? So then I was like, I need to design this template. What do I actually want to see? So I've then split it into the 2 key themes that I've wanted. So already we're looking here, but we're kind of expanding on what I want to see. And we're focused on key highlights from the major players, the big companies, and then followed by a deep dive. And then another section on the industry trends and a similar structure, key highlights and a deeper dive. That's the template that we're trying to match towards. And this is actually where the agent gets involved. It's in this little section here. These 2 people are really where the AI agent is working. And this is what we're going to use LangGraph for. The idea here is that 2 agents are having a conversation. So we've got one agent that's focused on writing the report, following this template, using these summaries, and then a reviewer which takes the output of this report writer, checks it over, makes sure it meets its standards, perhaps gives some feedback, and this will help enforce consistency as well. And this conversation can go on until the reviewer says, yes, I'm happy with it, I can sign off, and we can then use our Brevo API to get the email sent out. That's the plan. Let's now have a look at how we can implement this in a Jupyter notebook and then write a script off the back of the Jupyter notebook to get it deployed to render. Let's have a look. So let's take a look at the code. I'm using Cursor because it's just insanely powerful. If you haven't had a go at using it yet, I really recommend you download it and try it out. Anyway, back to the main topic, email research assistant. Let's get stuck in. So I've separated it out, trying to keep things neat and tidy. We've got our inputs at the top. In general, I like to start with either using something like a Streamlit dashboard or a Jupyter notebook first, because it's a significantly more interactive way to develop, especially if you start jumping directly to using a script, it's difficult to then see the outputs and debug where things are going wrong. So I like to start with a notebook and then transition all the code over to a script, and that's exactly what I've done here. So imports at the top, and then I'm loading in the environment variables that I've got stored here in my .env file. This is only if you want to run it locally. If you just want to run it deployed, then you don't need to worry about including these. So first step, looking back at our structure, this first step is performing the Google search on these search queries. So I've got a few search terms that I'm interested in: Agentic AI, OpenAI, LinkedIn, and Agentic AI Enterprise. But you can customize those with whatever search terms that you want to use for whichever topics that you want to research. The first step is creating this function to search through Serper. And what's going on here is I can specify the number of results and the time period. And so this is actually the most recent 24 hours. They've got a weird code system for setting it up. So this is the most recent 24 hours worth of results. So we're only getting, if it's running daily, we're only getting all the results since the last time we ran our report. Great. We need to specify our API key in the header. And then we post our request and we can iterate over all of the organic results only. So this way we can skip out the ads and all the other interactive content at the top of the page. I'm also making sure to include the search query in the results so we can then filter back, and I'm adding an ID so that the language model, when it's doing its filtering, can refer back to this ID and we can get back to the original results. And that's it. I'm then returning the results. It looks like I'm loading in the environment variables twice. I'm not sure why that's happening. I've then written a little helper function here to load in the prompts, and I've got an entire folder here for storing all the prompts that we used throughout this tutorial. And the one I think we'll be using here is for checking the relevance of the results. And so this is now checking each link summary for relevance. So when we would normally do a Google search, so AI agents, let's see what we come back, we get a whole load of results and we don't know which one of these are actually relevant to our topic. And so what this stage is going to be doing is looking at this summary here in the caption from the Google search and just deciding, based on this, just like you or I would, that based on this information, do we think that's relevant enough to what it is we're trying to achieve, which is what we want to see here, to justify including it. And so we'll have a look at the prompt now to see exactly what's going on. So relevance check, here we are. And I've structured all my prompts in a similar way, where you've got the role, any context that's relevant, the task that the language model is trying to achieve, and then some examples of what's relevant and what's not relevant. I'm also including what the output needs to be, and then the input. So I'm including the input in the system prompt here, but you don't have to. I just find that's what works best for me, especially when you've got a particularly long input. So let's go through it in a little bit more detail. I'm saying you're a research assistant who's working for a busy CTO. The CTO is trying to stay up to date with the latest news and information around particular topics. You're searching through Google, trying to determine which links are potentially relevant and worth exploring further. You will be asked to review search results and to determine if they are relevant to explore further or if they are not relevant. You'll be given a list of search results and you need to determine which 5 are most relevant and detail why. And I've given these the same details that I put on the draw.io page about what it is that we're interested in seeing. And also an example of what are the things I don't want to see. So startup blogs, technical blogs that aren't like industry update or from reputed third party. I've then said that you need to output the ID, and this is important so that we can get back of the 5 most relevant search results and also a short explanation for why they are relevant. And I think including this explanation is really important for the same reason that it's important in things like chain of thought. By forcing it to explain why, I think it will improve the quality of its selection. Because at the end of the day, it's only predicting the next token. And so this helps get it into that mindset, if you want to put it that way. So that's what the prompt looks like. And in the actual notebook, how that plays out is I'm using a structured output. So as I said a second ago, there are two things that I want out. I want the IDs that are relevant and an explanation of why that ID has been selected. And so we can use Pydantic, which plays really nicely with LangChain, to specify and force the language model to use this structure. And for ChatGPT, it guarantees 100% of the time it's going to fit this structure, so you won't ever get any errors with incorrect structured output. So that's what's going on here when we check this relevance of each of those results. So after we've checked for their relevance, we can then tie together all of our functions. So iterate over all of those search terms, search against Serper, and we get back our results. Then check the relevance of each ones. And finally, we can use the output of our language model to filter down those results to only the ones that are most relevant. And this is what they look like. So we've got a short summary of the title. This has come straight from Google. A link to the full article so we can scrape it a little bit later on. And then the Google snippet. So at the moment, this is just a filtered version of what Google would return. But still, it's looking good at this point. The next step is then getting that data off of the internet. And that's what, if you remember, we used Scraping Fish for. So we're using the Scraping Fish API as a proxy to get the HTML back, which means we always get HTML and rather than a whole load of JavaScript that just can't be digested. So what I'm doing here is I've written another couple of functions, one to do the scraping and another one to convert the HTML into a markdown format. And the reason for that is I think language models just find it easier to understand markdown. It also means that I'm only trying to pull out the tags that I know I'm interested in. So the heading tags, the links, anything bold, any list items, so all the things that I know are relevant. So let's have a look in a bit more detail. What the Scraping Fish API is doing is all I have to do is pass across the link that we're scraping and specify that I do want it to render JavaScript, and then it will just respond with the HTML as I would if I was using Beautiful Soup. So it's dead easy. I'm then passing it through this custom function just to strip out all the HTML and convert it into Markdown. And then we're getting all of the Markdown contents into a single variable. And they look a bit like this. So it looks very similar to what it did before, except for we've now got significantly more detail because we've got the whole article. So now we've got our Markdown. We just saw from that one that it's huge. It's absolutely massive. There's no way that I want to put all of that into a language model because I'm going to get charged a fortune. So instead, what I do is I limit the amount of characters down to, we're only getting 2,000 words, and then we're summarizing each website individually so that we don't put it all in together and not get too sensible a summary because it can't digest everything all in one go. So we're generating a summary, and I've got another prompt that does the summarization. So here, this is a similar prompt to before. I'm using a role, the task, the output, and the input again. And it's a pretty basic prompt, this one, because I'm only asking it to perform a summary. So hopefully it'll do a good job. So that's what's going on here. We're iterating over all of our Markdown files, performing the summary by invoking the language model here, and then saving out a new file with just the summary. And we're making sure that we're doing it in a fault-tolerant way, just in case, for whatever reason, a particular file or a particular website blows up for some reason. This is a pretty good practice if you're doing any kind of scraping, because you just don't know what you're going to get, and there'll be a load of edge cases that you're not prepared to handle with your parsing. So there we go, and that's generated 15 summaries for us in Markdown, and then this is what they look like. They all look much nicer than that impossible to digest HTML. So this is something we can feasibly put into a language model in one go and actually get it to digest. Right, so we've got summaries of all the sites. They're the most relevant sites. Right, so we've got our search results. We've filtered them down to the relevant ones, opened up the page with Scraping Fish, performed our summarization with ChatGPT 4o Mini, and we've now got these page summaries. Great. That's the easy job in a way, because we haven't introduced anything agentic to this point. It's just chaining together language models. But now we want to do something a little bit more focused. We've done the kind of grunt work and got all the relevant information together. We now need to formulate all that information into a consistent report for emailing out. And so we're going to use LangGraph to do this. And I've tried to break it down, but if you're not familiar with LangGraph, please check out another video where I go through building a customer support agent, which is more of a deep dive on LangGraph. So if you're not familiar with LangGraph, go and check that out. For now, I'm going to assume you've got some familiarity, but I'm still going to take you through it piece by piece. The type of agentic pattern we're using here is collaboration, which is where two agents speak to each other to help themselves solve a problem. So one agent produces an output, and the other agent, the other language model, then reviews the output, provides some feedback, and together they have a chat and they get to the possible, or hopefully the best possible outcome. So in LangGraph, everything revolves around the graph state. And the graph state is what is persistent between each node in the graph. And so every single agent can access this. So if we want to pass information from one language model to another, we need to do it through the graph state. Or if we want to save a particular output that isn't just, then we need to do it through the graph state. Any input to the graph, we need to do it through the graph state. So it's really core and really key to get this right. And so it's quite often used for chat applications. I'm not using it for that explicitly here, although there is some element of conversation. So we've still got our messages, but this is where the two language models will dump their own messages. I've got the summaries, which are the inputs. So these are all of the summaries here, these page summaries that are going to go into the agent. I've got whether or not the reviewer has approved the final summary. And I've also got all of the summaries, the intermediate summaries that have been created, because there might be 2 or 3 created until the reviewer is happy enough to sign it off. And we always create our graph with this state graph section. So this state graph is just saying that I don't want you to decide what the state is. I've got this custom state and I want you to use it. So this is how we start by creating our graph builder. The next step to building any graph in LangGraph, before we define how the nodes connect to each other, is just to write the code that actually goes into the nodes themselves. So when I say nodes, I mean this report writer and this report reviewer. So we need to determine what code is going to be executed here and how do they interact with the state and produce our created summary. So starting with the summarizer node, we're going to need a language model. That's a given. And so here we're using GPT-4o. What we're also going to need is our template, which is what we're using here. And so this is a template of what I want the output email structure to vaguely follow. And that's what this email template.md is. So you can change this if you want a different template, but this is the same one that I've got on draw.io. Big company updates and industry trends, and then an executive summary and some more detail down here. So we're going to need another prompt. And that's going to be our summarizer prompt. Again, similar structure, role, task, output formats, input summaries. So here I'm passing in the template in the output format section. And I'm also passing in the list of summaries that are going to need to be digested. I've also specified, so separately, it's got to produce a new summary, and it's also got to send a message to the reviewer asking for feedback. And the reason I've asked for this is to just initiate that conversation and to get things going. And then, so the next step is then going to be the reviewer taking the summary produced here and deciding whether it needs changing or not. So to make that happen in LangGraph, we need a few things. Firstly, we need our language models. So I'm using LangChain here with structured output. So I'm specifying that every single time our summarizer runs, it's got to produce an email summary, and this is the summary email, and it's also got to produce a message to the reviewer, which is what you saw in my instructions in the prompt before. And to then get it to actually use that output, we use this with structured output here. I'm choosing to use this chat prompt template from LangChain, just because I find it quite a convenient function to use. What makes it LangGraph are these nodes, and every single node in LangGraph takes in our graph state. And so that's this state up here. So every graph has access to this state. So within this node, we are going to run our language model, our chain with a structured output, and we're going to get back our email summary and message. What I'm then doing is adding 2 new messages to the conversation between our reviewer and the summarizer. The first is the email summary, and the next one is the message, as if you were to send a document to a colleague and say, hey, here's that document, can you give me some feedback? And so that's exactly what's happening here. And then I'm getting it added to the state by returning the new messages to be added and the list of summaries to be added. So that's our summarizer. Next is the reviewer, which looks very similar to the summarizer, except for we don't need to produce a summary. We just need to say whether or not it's good enough. And if it's not good enough, then give a message saying what needs to be improved on, what needs to be changed to make it good enough so that this summarizer agent has something to act on. So similar to before, we've got our chat prompt template and our reviewer prompt. And we've got another node here, which takes in the state again and is very similar. It invokes the language model and returns a new message which gets added to the state. The one interesting thing here is that I'm flipping the messages so that they both think they're the AI. So that from the reviewer's perspective, the summarizer agent is actually a human. So if it's an AI message, I swap it and make it a human message. And that just, I think because ChatGPT is designed for humans and AIs, we kind of have to use this abstraction. But I'm fine with that, and this works quite well. All that's left to do is to tie these nodes together with edges. So first we can add these nodes to the graph, add a node starting at the summarizer, so that's where we want to get into the graph. We always want the summarizer to lead to the reviewer, but we don't always want the reviewer to lead back to the summarizer. We only want the reviewer to go back to the summarizer if the reviewer has indicated that she is happy with the email summary. And so that's what we're doing here with this conditional edge. We're saying if it's been approved, go to the end. If it hasn't, go back to the summarizer mode to have another crack at doing the summary. And it's kind of difficult to visualize, but they've got a handy tool in LangGraph to help you see the graph. So we can see what's happening here in a bit more detail. We start the summarizer, go to the reviewer. If the reviewer is happy, we go to the end. If the reviewer isn't happy, we go back to the summarizer and can continue going through this loop. That's our graph, and it's not very long, and when you get in the habit of writing this code, it doesn't take very long to implement. All that's left to do is to just run it, and so that's what I've done, and you can then display the output markdown in the chat. So this is our big company updates, the key highlights, and I've specified in the prompt to include the link. So we've got the link if I wanted to go and check out the content for myself. It's kind of touched on relevant things that are fairly recent. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think it looks quite clean, looks quite neat. We've got industry trends as well, and it's definitely something that I could come back and adjust by tweaking the prompts or tweaking the search terms to make sure that it's covering what I needed to. And it's engaging enough that it's something that I could read pretty quickly and be like, I want to read that, I don't want to read that, or there's nothing new today that I haven't seen on previous days. So I'm quite happy with that. To tie it up in a bun, I need to get it automatically sent to my email because there's no way I'm jumping into a notebook and sending it and running it every single day. And this is quite straightforward. I've got a function here which is just code lifted from Brevo's website. And all we're doing is sending an email to my personal email with the subject Daily AI Research Summary. And that's all we need to get it done. I need my API key, but this is a free API key, so it's not even costing me anything. And so when I run, we can see it's completed, and I can go to my email and see the summary. So here is that email. And we've still got the same emojis that have been rendered in the email. It's nice and easy to digest. It's exactly what I wanted. Well, almost. It's exactly what I wanted. What I need to do now is get it to be sent to me automatically every single day. And the way we're going to do that is by deploying on render. You don't necessarily need to know this code to be able to deploy it. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to get stuck into render. I'll show you how to set up the environment variables on render so that you can get this running for your use case. Thanks for watching the video. If you're really enjoying this content, please like and subscribe, as it will motivate me to make more content and it will show me that this is the kind of stuff that you're interested in. So hit the like and subscribe button. Otherwise, let's get stuck into deploying to render. Now I want to show you how you can deploy this on render. So whether you've been following up to this point or you've jumped in right now, you don't need to know anything about the code from this point forward. You just need to know how to get onto GitHub and how to create an account on render, and then this email research assistant can work for you. So what you're going to need to do is first go to the GitHub repo, which the link will be in the description, but it's also on my screen right now. And what you're going to have to do is first give me a star, because I'll appreciate that, thank you. And then you can see the instructions on the site as well. So you can see the different API keys that you'll need, and we'll go to these ourselves, and you can see how to set up the render deployment. You can also see how you want to set it up for local development if that's what you want. So firstly, what I'm going to do is take this link and go over to my render dashboard. You will need to have a card on here, but it doesn't cost much. We'll see in a second, it costs a few pennies. And then I'm going to need to add a new job. And so what we're going to be using is a cron job, which is a job that triggers on a schedule. So I can go ahead and click new cron job, and then I can click Git provider, and I can put in my repo here. What you all need to do is use public Git repository, but they work the same way. Click on email research assistant, which is the right one, connect, and it's automatically picked up. It's Python 3, which is correct, and that we're on the main branch. All good. It's already got the build command. This is correct. You don't need to change that at all. The only thing you'll want to check is how frequently you want to do it. So if you're not familiar with what cron expressions are, you can go click on this link and it will give you a breakdown. But what I want it to do is run every day. So we can do that by specifying this, which is then going to run at midnight. The only other thing we need to specify is the entry command, the script. And what we're going to put there is Python email script .py, and this is a script which I've created in the repo that matches the Jupyter notebook. So it's the same thing that's running in Jupyter notebook, except for it's in a script format. If you were following along on code, that's running here, but essentially all of the code is exactly the same as the Jupyter notebook. The only difference is the fact that there's this main section down at the bottom to trigger the entry, but you don't need to be aware of that to run this part in render. Now we've got our entry point, we're just going to choose the smallest instance because it doesn't need to run quickly, this job. And the last thing we need to do before you can click deploy and get your email summaries working is set up the environment variables. Now I include in my repo a screenshot of all the environment variables that you need. There are 5 of them. The first one is the email address that you want to get sent to. So it's destination email, and the value here is going to be the email that you want the summary to be sent to. So that's my email there. The next one is going to be OpenAI API key. You can get your API key, so this will also need you to have billing details set up with OpenAI. But what you can do is create a new secret key here. And when you create a new secret key, email assistant on the default project, it's then going to give me an API key that I can just paste straight in to my cron job. There we go. Next one, I need a scraping API key. So for this, you need to go to scraping fish. Oh, not this one. Scraping fish. There we go. And you need to buy an API key. So you can just buy these requests. You don't even need to have an account. You can buy just 1,000 requests if that's what you want for $2, and they then email you an API key. So I've already had my API key emailed, and I'm going to go ahead and grab it, which is scraping fish API key. Great, there we go. Go ahead and burn through my API key if you like. It's not going to last long. There's only $2 on there. So I can go into the value, and the key is scraping underscore key. There we go. Next we need, this is the API key for Brevo. I don't know why I've stored it like this, but let's go onto Brevo, and you can create an API key on Brevo by going here and going API. You can then go down to your API key if you've already got one, or you can generate a new one up here. So I've already got one. I'm just going to copy it. I can put it into here. And the value for that was sending blue underscore API key. Lovely. There's only one more that we need, which is for Serper to do the Google search. Serper API key. And this is another free one, serper.dev. There we go. We go into the dashboard once you've signed up, and you can get your API key by clicking on API key and selecting it from there. Now I can deploy, and this should then pull the code, do the build, deploy it, and it should now run. after it's built successfully, it will then run every day on a schedule. But if you want to run it before then to see that it's working, after the build is finished, we can then click trigger up in this top corner, and that will manually trigger the job to run. Great, we've got a successful build. I'm going to trigger it, but then it might take about 5 to 10 minutes to run, so I'm not going to make you hang about for that. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out my other video which goes into more detail about LangGraph, building a customer support agent. Also, like and subscribe, it'll encourage me to make more of this content, and have a good day and the rest of your week. See you later.